Okay, good afternoon. I would like to welcome you all. Thank you for braving the heat and the humidity to get outdoors and come over to the library. My name is Mary Ray, and I would like to welcome you to the Technical Library and our program, Have I Got a Story for You? This afternoon, we've had 5 very extraordinary women agree to share their stories and experiences as women in the sciences and engineering fields. They each in turn will give us some insight into why they may have chosen their field of study, what hardships or obstacles that they may have had to face while completing their education and joining the workforce here at China Lake. And hopefully, we will also hear about some of the rewards and personal successes that they have enjoyed. After the very briefest of introductions, I'm going to let them take the floor. They know themselves best. And we will have the time then at the end for a little question and answer session. On one quick housekeeping note, because we do videotape these so that we can have them on DVD to check out later, we are asking that you take off your badges or turn them around backwards so those don't show at all. So let me start now here at the far end. We have Samantha Hawkins, who is a research chemist in the analytical chemistry group. And next is Samantha's Kim Berard. She's out at the FA-18 AWL H5E block manager. And next is Betty Moody. She is our head of the Missile Propulsion, Explosives, and Propellants Division. Lois Reed, mathematician in the Navigation and Weapons Concept Development Branch. And finally, last but certainly not least, Jean Bennett as our senior research scientist, who is now retired from China Lake, but she does continue to volunteer her time in the Optics, RF, and Materials Physics group. Jean, if you'd like to start, we'd like to hear the stories.
Thank you. I'd like to share with you some of the interesting experiences I've had over almost 50 years here. Be 50 years in November. I'm an Easterner. I was born and brought up in Washington, D.C. area, where my father worked at what was then the National Bureau of Standards. And after my sister and I were a little older, my mother taught chemistry laboratory at George Washington University. I went to a public high school there, then chose for college, a college with a beautiful campus in New England, Mount Holyoke College, and was inspired by the head of the physics department, who was a woman. And she had so much fun doing lecture demonstration experiments. Her enjoyment of physics was contagious, and so I majored in physics. But since my parents were both PhD chemists, to make them happy, I also had a double major in chemistry. From there, I went to Penn State. I'm leaving out all the adventures and the fun things, of which there are many. The first almost weeks at Penn State, we had a meeting of the graduate students and all the people in the department, which was a large one, about 70 people, and I was the only girl. And so everybody knew my name, and lots of people knew who I was, and I didn't know them. And I met this young, handsome Montanan who seemed to know a lot by the name of Hal Bennett, and we got to know each other and got married the following summer. And I spent 4 years at Penn State in a spectroscopy laboratory in the sub-basement, down with the dripping water pipes and the humidity, and looking at wiggling lines on strip chart recorders. And eventually I managed to get through that ordeal and never want to go to graduate school again. And since Hal was supposed to be drafted into the Army, being a Montanan and education isn't as important as farming and other things, we went to Wright Air Development Center for a year so he could enlist in the Air Force, but his enlisted papers got lost. And we worked in an infrared reconnaissance group there. And I found out the meaning there of good enough for government work. All the civil servants in that group, there were about 5 of them, had died, and they stuffed their bodies and they sat them at tables and they stuck newspapers in front of them, and they did the bare minimum of work that they could and died to 5. The military that circulated through were the ones that kept things going, and there was a captured German scientist, and his goal in life was to have a boondoggle program in Colorado so he could go skiing. Turned out he broke his leg the week before the program was to start, and he spent the time in a hotel room orchestrating things. So anyway, the minute I set foot at Wright Field, I wanted out. So I searched the Optical Society journals and found this funny place, NOTS, and it looked like it had some interesting work going on. and there was a person by the name of W.F. Kohler, who later became Rick, and he was working there, and we contacted him, and he was just setting up a lab, and he needed bodies to fill it and do some exciting optics work. And so we arranged to meet him at a meeting. And he said, oh yes, I have a position for Hal right away, you know, billet. And he thought he could get one for me. This was 6 months before we would be able to come. And so I found out 30 years later that he went up to Bill McLean and said, can I have another billet? And Bill said, well, yes, I guess so. And then he discussed the salary and the level at which we came in, and we each had had 1 year of experience after our PhDs, so that would have been going from GS-11 to GS-12. And so Hal would automatically get to be a GS-12, and they were saving money then, so I would get to be a GS-11. And Rick Kohler said, no, 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 you don't understand. These people are equal. And so he argued with McLean, and McLean said, okay, but you have to become head of the physics division in order to make this happen. So there was politics even back then. And when I came, I was not the first woman scientist. There was a very famous person who was either a department head or soon to become one, Peggy Rogers. Some of you may have heard stories about her, but she had a PhD from Rice that she got in 1940, and she first came here in 1949. She was married to a physicist, Fred Rogers. And so as they were starting a family, she was here working at the bench level as an Indian. And then they left in 1953 because Fred had an offer of a position at a university somewhere. And then he had the bad taste to die, and Peggy liked the place here, so she came back in 1957. Now was a single mother with 4 young kids, and she managed to work her way up from the bench level to be head of one of the departments, and she was a very effective department head. I'm sure there were other early women, but she's the most famous one. When I came, the only woman that was around was a summer person in chemistry who came, Trudy Smith, who came with her husband Reuben, and they spent the summer and then went back home. And a few years later, 1961, Marion Hills came. She's a physical chemist, and she stayed for her professional career here. And then later on, there was Charlotte Loma and other people, but very sparse women in research department, and I don't really know about the ones in the other groups. In the early days, I was back in the corner. I was an Indian and happily working on some projects of my own with independent research money. Anybody ever heard of that? And that was fine. And then in 1960 we got a windfall because what was then ARPA, Advanced Research Projects Agency, that later on morphed into DARPA, was looking for ways of improving the expertise of U.S. labs. So they gave us $2 million over a period of 5 years to set up a state-of-the-art optical measurements laboratory. And so Hal Bennett went to work busily designing things that were impossible for the machine shop people to build, and got some very good instruments thanks to some very clever people in our model shop and other places. And I was back in the corner with my work, and later on when the instruments were built, I handled the measurement programs where people from government contractors and outside organizations and inside organizations would send samples in, and we'd figure out what measurements to take on them and give them the results and charge them for it. And that was all things that I did. And about the same time, lasers became important, and laser damage and big mirrors happened because there were these huge high-power lasers that sent beams of light out into space to do bad things. And they had to hit mirrors, and the mirrors' coatings tended to fry and sizzle and do other bad things, so that there was a group set up also with the ARPA money of laser damage measurements headed by Jim Porteous, and later on Steve Seidel and M.J. Swallow, and much later Denton Mars. And they did some amazing work on state-of-the-art measurements of laser damage. And these were reported at the annual symposia held in Boulder, Colorado each year. That was a Boulder Damage Symposium. And there were many thick books of proceedings, and there were maybe 8 or 10 or 12 papers from the China Lake group on work that they'd done. Also, the ARPA program generated many reports of work that had been done by all of us. During part of this time, I was working with one of the theorists who's a very good one, Merle Elson. He's just recently retired here, and he did very high power mathematics figuring out things that related to surfaces. And his idea of a paper was an equation and equation to but equation. And so I would work with Merle and say, well, you know, what does it mean? What does this thing mean? And how do you get from here to there? And so I'd fill in the blanks to make it so it would be understandable to somebody else. And so we had several joint papers published. I also worked with the early Sidewinder group that was finding that they had problems with scattering and scattered light in the Sidewinder, and when it looked close to the sun it got blinded and it couldn't see as far as they hoped to, and so they were changing from the AIM-9L version to the AIM-9M version. The L version, the collector in the seeker head was a little portion of a spherical mirror, and the one that was higher tech that was on the design board was an A-sphere that was shaped more like a parabola, and I did the testing on that. So I worked with people like Eddie Allen and Larry Nichols and Joe Adler and Dean Hill and some of these other folks over in the infrared group testing these beasties, and that was fun. And I also got involved in the demonstration project. And you know, we have the grade levels now, DP3, DP4. Well, those started with a group of us here at China Lake, and I was responsible for writing the requirements for the scientists and engineers. And we had half as many levels in the DP system as in the GS system. And so I was hitting up against a level between something and something else that I couldn't break through, and we just sort of erased that with a DP. So I had personal reasons for helping to write these specs just right. And we had a lot of fun doing that. And I remember James Irvine was doing the same thing for the standards and specifications, and we had other people working on other pieces of this. And so we'd have meetings, and as I recall, they were somewhere in the library here hashing that out. And that was a great success. As you know, it's been adopted by many other DoD and other organizations around the country. I understand that the original charter here is expired, and I don't know what's going to happen. But anyway, so that was another project. Then about in the time goes on and many things happen, and we get up to the early 1980s, and 1983 was an interesting year for me because Hal Bennett had been the upfront guy, and he'd been making all the presentations to the upper management here and the visiting admirals and all. He'd make the presentations there, and he'd travel to Washington and get money and all this stuff. Well, there was a phone call that came in from one of our mutual friends saying that he wanted me to go to a meeting in Germany and give an invited talk at this prestigious German Applied Optics Organization meeting, and also go to the first spectacular SPIE meeting in Geneva. And it wasn't Hal. I was used to fielding these messages, and when Hal got home, I'd give them to him. And I thought about it, and no money. And then finally they called up and said, well, are you going to accept? And I said, no, there's no money to pay for it. They said, well, how would you like to have SPIE pay for it? So I said, sure. So I had a 2-week vacation and lots of fun, and the red carpet rolled out, and all this good stuff happened. And Hal, for the first time, had to stay home and mind the dogs and do his own cooking. And I came back, and he'd had a problem with the microwave oven. He wasn't too computer literate at that point. And so he, you know, it had gotten in some sort of loop, and it was broken. And he was saying, well, he'd have to take it to somewhere and get it fixed. So I went over to the wall, pulled the plug out, let it sit for a while, put it back in, and it worked perfectly. So anyway, that was the handwriting on the wall that got him to thinking, well, maybe she's going to be running around, because at the same time, I was proposed to be one of the candidates for the president of the Optical Society of America. It had been all men before then. And so there was this open election with 2 men and a woman running against each other, and somehow the membership voted me in, and so that was a 4-year stint. About that time, Hal went his separate way. He found somebody that would take care of him, and I went off to Huntsville, Alabama for about 2 years to set up an optics lab at the newly formed Center for Applied Optics there, and work with politics at the university. And, heat and humidity, you think it's bad here, it's infinitely worse there. And so that was an interesting experience. I came back and did more work with groups. By that time it was all applied, the IR money had long gone. But we had this demo project, and we had these interviews of what have you done, your expectations, and have you fulfilled these in order to get 1 or 2 or whatever points to get extra money. And I was siphoning money off of various other people's projects to do the surface measurements, and that worked out pretty well until that money started to run out too. And I got this visit to Huntsville was paid for by the National Science Foundation. I was one of the original had a visiting professorship for women in science. And then as the money got low again, I went 10 years later to Mount Holyoke College and got a second one of those and stirred up trouble there, set up an optics lab so the students who were women could learn about real-world optics and lasers and how a laser worked and practical stuff rather than all this theory they'd been taught. And I was instrumental in getting a woman hired into the physics department who would involve her students in research. And before that, it had been an all-man faculty in this women's college. I felt pretty good about that because the woman we brought in is doing great. So I came back to China. I got a phone call from Carol Poppin, who was our administrative assistant here in August, say, and saying, well, would you like to retire with a golden handshake? No yacht, just a few dollars at the end of the year. And I said, well, I'm not sure. I called up the then head of the physics division, Jim Stanford, who was a young kid that I'd sort of helped to get on his way. And I said, well, Jim, I'll retire if I can have my office, my lab, phone, fax, email, copy machine, and especially the library. I need the library. So he said, no problem. Nothing was ever written down. No agreement, nothing. So I came back, I retired, and I got all the goodies, and I'm still here, and I'm still having fun, and I'm still working with various groups around, Joe Roberts and Jennifer Irvin and Dan Harris, and you name it, and I've been working with them, and off-center I've worked in Sweden and Japan, and I don't have time to tell you lots of other stories, but it's been fun, and thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lois. I took a little different path to get here. I kind of took the hard way to get here. My first time when I got out of high school and went to post-secondary school, I studied medical laboratory technology, worked in a hospital lab, got married, worked in another hospital lab, spent 4 years in Newport, Rhode Island as the wife of an enlisted sailor, stayed home with my young kids for a few years. And then we uprooted from upstate New York to Arizona. And I continued to stay home with the kids for a few years and then moved to Yuma. And while in Yuma, I spent 1 season in the lettuce fields, and that was actually quite interesting and actually paid quite better than some of the jobs in town. I met some really good people, interesting people everywhere I've been. Worked for an insurance agent for a while, worked for a dentist office for a couple of years, and then my former husband and I spent about 10 years contracting, doing construction-related work, and sometimes that took us to different states. We worked on a lot of small stuff and some large. And in Yuma, helped do a lot of work for winter visitors, and a lot of dirt, a lot of concrete, a lot of sweat, a lot of heat, a lot of snakes, all that kind of stuff. And I actually spent about a year as a GS4 accounting clerk at Yuma Proving Ground. And that was my first exposure to government work. And then as the kids got older, actually as we got older, and the shoulders get sore and all that, it's like we got to figure out a way to get back to school. So we actually went back to university at the same time our oldest child did. And at one point in time, all four of us were in college together in Flagstaff at Northern Arizona University. And that was quite interesting. Actually, I highly recommend it. It forces you to respect and understand each other as adults. And so I value those years and that experience. But it was unique. And then eventually my former husband and I split up, and we all finished school, kids too. And so in that respect, that big struggle to get the education paid off for all of us in different ways. At Flagstaff, I started out in electrical engineering, and by the third year decided that math was my true love. So I changed to math. Then I had to get a minor, so the easiest one at the time as far as number of credits was physics. So my undergraduate is really quite a mix of engineering, math, and physics. And that suits me. I like variety anyway, but it also meant that it took a little bit longer to actually get to the point where you get the degree. During the interviews there, I interviewed with Jay Chun, who's now retired, but he worked here for quite a while. And when the interview was over, it was a very good interview, he said, well, I'm going to recommend that the organization send you a letter. And of course, my prior experience was civil service. I'm thinking, okay, in 6 months I'll probably get a form letter. But I was pleasantly surprised. I think about 2.5 weeks later, I had the letter. And my one criterion at that time was whoever gave me the soonest start date, because with all four of our family members in college at the same time, I was broke, I had bills, and I had no way to pay them. So the soonest start date was the winner, and that happened to be China Lake. And I had no idea what I was getting into. So I packed my few belongings into my old Plymouth and came across the desert. Came the long way across the desert because I knew the car wouldn't make it up that long Cajon Pass. Air conditioning didn't work. Got here and figured, okay, that car isn't going anywhere for a long time, so you better make the best of it. And to my pleasant surprise, I couldn't have ended up in a better place. When I got here and found out that I was going to get paid to go talk to people for a month and set up tours of my choosing, I just couldn't believe it, especially after the varied, work and jobs that I'd had. So I was happy. And I have to say that I have not been bored a day since I've been here. There's been days where you get tired or frustrated or something, but never discouraged and never bored. There's always something interesting going on. I managed to do 5 tours in 5 different departments. They called us JPs then. It's the same as the ESDP, JP for Junior Professional. I found people to be open and helpful and friendly and just help point in the right direction, help introduce you to somebody else. Everybody from the working level on up to department heads. It was fantastic. I thought it was really great. Did 5 tours in 5 different departments, took nearly 2 years to tour until I figured, well, if they don't catch me, I don't have to settle down. But eventually I said, well, you ought to pick a code, and so I ended up staying in my home code, which was a weapons effectiveness analysis. But I was also lucky in that my management let me go and take on other tasks for other people, whenever it suited everybody. So I continued to work across different departments and different groups and do different tasks. So I've done the detailed analysis kind of things. Researched a lot of different issues and produced, white papers and reports for different people on center. Have helped write several large reports, LFT, the Live Fire Test and Evaluation reports, some modeling reports, just supported a variety of things and performed a variety of tasks, and that suits me. I have to tell you one story though, and before coming here, about a year and a half before coming here, in a hot June when we were still in school. I packed up my old Plymouth and my son and his girlfriend, who's now my daughter-in-law, and some of their friends, and they were going to participate in the first ever National Collegiate Bicycle Road Racing Championship at San Luis Obispo, hosted over there. So we trekked across the desert in my old Plymouth, and it was acting up on the way over, but it was fine on the coast. So after 3 days of hard racing on their part, we headed back across the desert. Now keep in mind, we're starving student budgets. You know, we have enough gas money to get back to Flagstaff, and car started overheating as soon as you come out of the, the coastal area and back down toward the desert. And we get about 20 miles at a time and have to stop and pour some water over the radiator and get to a place called Kramer's Junction. And at that time, there were only 2 gas stations there. And I can still feel the heat and the rumble and smell the diesel. And as I'm filling up the car, I said to the kids, I'm glad I don't ever have to come back to this ugly hunk of real estate for the rest of my life. Never say never. There's probably more stories, but I'll wait for questions.
I had a similar story, only it was needles. This was October, and it was over 100 there, and we couldn't get the gas to stay in the tank. And it would come out, and it took us about a half an hour to fill the car up. And then we went cross-country in the desert, and we went through Atolia and Red Mountain, and I'd never been to China Lake. And what have I gotten myself into, Am I going to be living with a mine dump in my backyard and broken glass? And then we came over the hill and we saw this beautiful green oasis, and it just looked like heaven.
And Betty, now it's your turn.
Hi, I'm wondering this green oasis that she found.
That's what I was wondering.
I'm Betty Moody. I started out in Mississippi. I am from the big Civil War town in Mississippi of Vicksburg. It was the last stand that the poor South had before Sherman just crushed us and kept on marching to the sea. But I went to school in Mississippi. I went to a private school there. The name of it is Tougaloo. It's an Indian name. It means 2 rivers. And there are actually 2 rivers that run underground under the campus. So when we have a nice rainstorm, if you're by one of the grates on the campus, you can actually hear the water running under the campus. I too am a physics major. Now my physics department head was also my physics advisor, but we all thought Dave was a little nuts. We all had bets running on when he was going to get put in the nut farm before we all graduated. Needless to say, Dave managed to last quite a few years. But I also was the only female that was majoring in physics. I managed to actually get my physics degree in 3.5 years, so you can imagine I didn't have much of a social life, but I did have fun. From there, I ended up working for the Corps of Engineers, the Vicksburg district in Mississippi. So those are the guys that are responsible for part of the problem from Katrina. Since we probably should have done a better job on the levee, since that was one of the things that the group I worked in was responsible for, with the levees from Memphis all the way down to New Orleans. So that tells you how well I did my job. Fortunately, my stint to come out here happened. A friend of the family who actually works in LA was home visiting, and he was one of those guys that said, oh, you shouldn't be in Mississippi. You should spread your wings. Okay, help me spread my wings. So he took my resume, and the next thing I know, I get this letter from this place called China Lake. Well, the person that I was working for, he was in the Army Reserve, so he used to do his training at Fort Irwin. So he's like, do you know where you're going? That godforsaken place out there? Let me show you on the map where you're going to be. He was determined I was not going to leave, but so we sat down, we looked at the map, I was like, oh God. I was like, okay, we'll give it a shot though anyway. And so packing up to drive out here, my mom, the little short lady, was like, you're going out there by yourself? you don't know anybody. We don't have any family out there. So she was all in a tither. So she got one of the cousins to drive with me. And I couldn't drive out here by myself. So we're driving across country, and we get to Barstow. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning when we get there. And this cousin has just racked my last nerve. So I called my sister and said, I'm about ready to boot him out of the truck, and he can figure out how he's going to get back to Mississippi the best way he can, because I've had it. And she's like, hang in there. So we cruise into Ridgecrest, and as I'm coming down the hill, China Lake Boulevard, I'm coming down the hill, I'm like, oh my God. Cruise in, get to my apartment, and, so we don't unload it. Well, fortunately, he was going to be on the first bus out of Ridgecrest that morning, so it was basically I didn't go to sleep so I could make sure he didn't miss the bus. So get there and get him off, get back to the apartment. I have to admit, very nice people, because that morning I was trying to unload the truck, and one of the guys who was a highway working construction work here in the valley, they were staying in that same apartment complex, and the guy saw me let the truck door up, and he just graciously walked across and said, oh, I'll help you unload, and showed me around Ridgecrest and everything. These are the grocery stores, the whole shebang. So that worked out pretty well. Well, it's time to show up to work at China Lake. You guys have a very relaxed atmosphere here. On that side of the country, you're very much, when you go to work, you are dressed. We're talking the business suit, the heels, the hose, the whole shebang. I show up, suit, hose, heels, shebang. What are you dressed for? Go to work? I started out in WebTech. Some of you may know the gaming group that was here on base that used to sit right back out there. We had the facilities out there, and that was my home code. Interesting bunch, and I ended up, I only did 4, Lois, 4 tours. And I ended up going to the code that I did my first tour with, and that was the test and evaluation group. So I'm a range rat. I am an official range rat because I actually did a tour in the Pentagon in the group that's responsible for the test range and facilities. And so I have an official documentation signed by the head range rat. So started with that group, working with a bunch of guys, the only female in the building. They had one female there, probably maybe 5-10 years prior to my getting there, who had retired. And she was a smoker and everything else, so she fit right in with the guys. Here I am, I show up, not what they're looking for. And so I had to prove my worth there. That worked out pretty well because, with most guys, the best way is through their stomachs. Since I like to cook, I was a shoo-in. You bring in snacks and everything, you're good to go. Worked in that group, got my certification in radiography, so I'm actually a certified radiographer. So, hey, next time you're at the doctor, give me a call. I'll read you x-rays for you. Did that, ended up being the section head for that group when the old cadre that was there decided to retire. So I became the section head, worked down there. Then I did a rotational assignment, like I said, in the Pentagon. Had fun back there, worked with a lot of guys. As always, you're the only female sitting in a room. You really have to adjust to that. And as you can see, as I'm sitting up here in the middle, I have to adjust to that a lot too. Anyway, did my year back there, came back, was branch head, came branch head now. And we ended up in this lovely thing called an A76 study. God, you don't ever want to do that. Because you do not become the most efficient organization. You really become the most inefficient organization, but somehow they think that's right. So we did that. We made it through that. Then I ended up actually a lab weenie because I ended up in Mike Lab in the Tomahawk program office. So I worked down there. I had the penetrative variant program that we were working with DITRA as our sponsor. Stayed down there for about 3 years doing that. Actually, I took the program. When I took it, it was behind schedule and over budget. So you can imagine the reception I got, the first budget meeting that I went to with the sponsor, and basically he reamed me with a bat wrapped in barbed wire. I got through that. By the time I left, it was on schedule, and we actually had money. So that was a pretty good way to leave the program office at that point. From there, I became a deputy division head. back out in the ranges again. So see, didn't stay in the lab long, went back out to the ranges, and was a division head out there. And soon I ended up with 2 divisions, unfortunately. Don't ever do that. Because we hadn't found someone to replace me. I had in mind who I wanted to replace me, but we were working that process. So for about 6 months in there, I had 2 divisions I had to run. And there's nothing worse than trying to run an R&D division and a T&E division. They don't think alike. The R&D guys are around coming up with little concepts on how to do things, and and it's long and drawn out. Nothing's going to happen tomorrow. Nothing may not happen next year. And then you got the T&E guys that are like, oh, I want to blow it up. Let me have it now. Give it here. Yeah, type of deal. And so it was really trying to, and the personalities really reflect that. So here I was trying to stay in the middle of dealing with my R&D people and my T&E people. And I'm one of those managers that tend to make you responsible. So it was a little hard for the R&D guys for some of the things I was requesting of them, because they'd not had to do it before. And they were like, well, I've never had to do that before. Well, guess what? You learn how to do it now. So here, have the ball, take with it, run. The T&E guys were pretty much of the kind you were almost having to say, like, could I have part of the ball back type of deal, rather than you just running all the time. And so it's been a fun experience. I've mentored quite a few people. I've had fun with it. I don't know how much to tell you guys, because unfortunately I feel like China Lake right now has been inundated with crap about me in the various papers here locally for the last year or so. So I was trying to think of some of the fun stuff that I've done and had fun. One interesting experience that you may have to deal with, that first group I had, one of the guys didn't particularly care for a female supervisor. And so his thing was, if I did something he didn't particularly care for, he went into his I'm not talking to you mode. So that's when you figure out whether or not you're a psychologist, whether or not you're a minister, whether or not you're a babysitter, whether or not you're a parent, that whole shebang, because you have this adult that's pouting, this adult that's not speaking to you, this adult that's practically holding his breath because he doesn't want to talk to you. So it was kind of interesting. I mean, we'd walk in the hallway, but in a space like this, and we could pass right by each other, and I'd say, hi, Joe, not his real name, hi, Joe, and he would walk by just as if I was a breeze of fresh air. Never open his mouth or anything like that. And like I said, I used to cook for these guys all the time because we had a full-fledged kitchen. Well, one particular day when he was in his non-speaking mode, we were doing breakfast, and I had decided for breakfast that particular day they could have eggs any way they wanted to go with the rest of their stuff. So everybody else is in there, we're all in the break room, and I'm sitting there and I'm doing an omelet for one of the guys, and he walks in the room, we're all talking, and he walks up to me, and he says, I'd like my egg over easy. Takes a seat. This is all this man has said to me for like a week. Everybody in the room just stops and stares, and it's like, I can't believe he did that. And I just calmly did his egg, gave it to him nicely, and left it at that. So sometimes, you have to be the bigger person and just sort of like let it go and just caught it out. So I'm good to go. That was my story. So on to you.
I don't know how I can top those 3. My name is Kim Berard, and thank you for having me today. A little bit nervous. I've never done this before, so we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Over the last week or so, I've been thinking about my career here at China Lake, last 10 years or so, and in reflecting on all of my experiences, it became overwhelming to me how many opportunities there are out there for the people that are here at the lake. It's absolutely amazing. So to give you a little bit of background about myself, I was born and raised in Idaho and in the Montana area. And as several young women find themselves shortly after high school, I ended up pregnant, a single mom of a little boy. And about a year after my son was born, I moved to Ridgecrest, California, not because of the base, not because I was going to school, but because my dad and my mother were moving here with his job. And I needed a place to stay. So I packed up my baby and I put him in my back seat and I drove myself 1,200 miles down from Pocatello, Idaho to Ridgecrest, California. And about a year later, I had another baby, 2 little ones, single mom, working as a waitress. And I eventually decided, you know, this is a tough life. I'm going to go back to school. One of the most amazing things about Ridgecrest, California is the college up at the hill called Saracoso Community College, and it provided me an excellent opportunity to get my 2-year degree in about 2 years while working. As soon as I received my associate's degree, I started commuting to Bakersfield, where I got my bachelor's degree in mathematics in 1996. 2 days after the commencement ceremony, I started work here at the base. I got a recommendation from a lady I went to school with. Her husband worked for the F-18 AWL and passed my name to somebody. And it just happened to work out pretty darn well. So I started working as a local contractor as a software engineer. Now, my background's in mathematics. I've never done software engineering, so hey, I'll try it. I don't know how hard it can be. Well, it was a good learning experience. I worked for a team in support of the F-18 AWL, the Advanced Weapons Laboratory, called the Information Technology Information Systems Task Team, the ITIS team. And our charter at the time was to build, develop, deploy tool sets that the F-18 AWL used during their normal business operations. So for example, we developed a database that would store all of the test information that the test engineers gathered during flight testing. And we developed business tools that the F-18 could store budget information in, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of variety in the types of things that we developed. One of the great things about working on that team, and you kind of alluded to it in your story, is I had an opportunity to look at the development of a single product from beginning till end. I saw the thought of what something could be and got to see it through the project planning phases, the budgeting phases, the development phases, the test phases, the deployment phases, and finally delivery to the customer. Where in a lot of organizations, you know, the product is so big and complex that you're lucky if you see a portion of that development process in and of itself. So I look at my experience on that team as a real global systematic experience for me. So after I was a software engineer, I moved into project management and became a project lead for one of the tools that we were creating on the team. And that was a very good experience for me as well. According to Myers-Briggs, I am an introvert to the extreme. I know, I'm amazed I'm here. I'm still trying to figure that out. But becoming a project lead on that team forced me to get out of my shell and get in front of the customer and talk to them and ask them what they needed and talk to the users and have an understanding of how our team can help them. So I look at that as a very positive thing as well. I see some familiar faces in the audience here. After I worked as that project lead for that business tool, I was asked by the AWL to go do an analysis on ERP. And you all are probably familiar with ERP and what it did to us a couple of years ago. And honestly, the task at hand was, Kim, go learn everything you can about ERP and come back and tell us what it means to us. So I spent about a year traveling back east and understanding the database and what it means and trying to apply lessons learned for that organization as well as 4.1 in general, how to position themselves best with this new system that's coming online. And some of the things that I learned during that experience is change management. Wow, what an issue. Change initiatives, how hard are they to actually institute across an organization of our magnitude? I learned how the PMA works. I learned how the decisions the PMA makes affects our day-to-day business here at the lake. Absolutely amazing. After about a year of the ERP, I shifted gears 100%, 180 degrees, I would say, and went into block management with an F-18. A block is essentially a software upgrade of the mission computer that resides on the F-18 platform. So big time shift from tool development support, learning about databases, to leading an aircraft avionics software upgrade. That was about 3 years ago. I was a deputy of the H3 block, and probably a year and a half ago I transitioned to be the H5E block manager. And I tell you what, I am just learning so much. It never ceases to amaze me how much information there is out there. I'm dealing with all sorts of people, software engineers, test engineers, Boeing, PMA, you name it. I'm dealing with them and maintaining budget and schedule and all the craziness associated with leading projects. You can relate. So in closure, I guess what I would have to say is my career so far, 10 years in support of F-18, has taken so many different paths. Some of them very technical in the engineering, some of them not so technical, being in project management. But reflecting back on it, I would have to, I'm kind of amazed by how many different opportunities are just right there, and that anybody can grab any one of them and figure out what to do with them and make it better. And so thank you for letting me share my story, because I think it was a real revelation for me.
My name's Samantha Hawkins, and as you may be able to tell from my accent, I'm from the South as well. So I was born and raised in a very small East Texas town, and when I say very small, about 500 people. So it was very funny. Both of my parents are teachers, or were teachers. My dad's retired now, and my dad was a science teacher. So he always thought that it would be very cool if I liked science. And he encouraged me to learn everything I could all the time. So I did, or I tried to. And my dad was also my high school chemistry teacher. And when I was in 10th grade, I applied to a program in Texas called the Texas Academy of Math and Science. And they let high school kids that live in Texas go to college 2 years early. So I got this fantastic opportunity to move away from home when I was 16 and go live with a bunch of other math and science geeks and take college courses. And we took a lot of math and science college courses. And this was a program they started in Texas to try to get young people more interested, or more American students interested in math and science and getting math and science degrees. Yeah. So my first semester I went there and I thought I was going to go pre-med. And then I took my first biology class. And the first section of biology was cell biology. And I thought, this is the worst thing I've ever had to sit through in my life. So I had a pretty cool chemistry professor, and I was doing well in there. And I said, well, maybe I'll just try chemistry for a while. So I went ahead and got a chemistry degree at the University of North Texas. And then after my junior year, I got to do a summer program at University of Southern California, where I went for the summer and did some research in chemistry, and decided then that I wanted to go on and get my PhD. And my dad at first wanted me to be a doctor, and then when I decided not to be a medical doctor, he said, well, PhD's okay. As long as you can put doctor in front of your name. So my senior year, I started applying to grad schools, and went and visited a bunch. And for some reason, every time I visited grad school, they wanted me to talk to any and all women professors that were there to try to encourage me to come. So I think every grad school I visited, and I visited 5, they all had at least one woman on the faculty. And I ended up going back to USC for my PhD. And I chose a project that had 2 advisors, and one of them was the only woman at the time on the faculty. And during my first year, they hired another woman. So, and they were both in physical chemistry. So I worked pretty closely with both of the women that were in chemistry department at USC. And they made it their mission to make sure that all of the women that were in grad school there felt very comfortable, and nothing bad was going on to us. And I think I was very fortunate because I don't remember ever feeling discriminated against for being a woman as far as from the people I worked with. The only time I felt discriminated against was from non-scientists or people that I didn't work with who just couldn't understand why in the world a young woman wanted to waste her life away in school instead of getting married and having kids. So every time I go visit my family, I hear the same thing. Do you have a boyfriend yet? There's always that word, yet. So anyway, I finished my degree about 1.5 years ago. And while I was looking for a job during my last semester in grad school, which I'd been there 6 years and said, it is really, really time to get out. I've got to get a job now. So I started looking online at different websites and decided that academia really wasn't for me because you have to do research and you have to teach. And when you first start off, it's like 16-hour days every day. I said, I'm too lazy for that. So I said, I either want to do research or only teach, and or just get a job, you know, where I don't have to worry with other people. So I started looking in government. And I'm looking on the website, on the Office of Personnel Management website, and I saw a listing for a vibrational spectroscopist at China Lake. I saw it as a naval base in California. So immediately, I'm thinking Point Magoo. And I submitted my resume and didn't hear anything back for, you know, it's government, so 3 months. And maybe not quite that long, but I get a phone call, and this guy on the phone says, hi, my name's Larry Merwin, and you submitted a resume. Do you remember? It was forever ago. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I think I'd like to have you come up here for an interview. And I said, okay. You know, so we scheduled it, and then I look on the map, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I come up here, and it was September and really hot, and I took the job anyway. But you know, I lived in Los Angeles for several years and decided that it was too crowded and there's too much traffic, and if I ever in my life want to buy a house, I have to get out of LA. So so I took the job here, and I've been here about 1.5 years, and it's really exciting. I mean, things are going on all the time. Someone will bring a sample into my lab. I'm a lab rat, one of the nerdy people with glasses and a coat, and that never gets anywhere except for Wing 6. People will bring a sample into my lab, and they'll say, you know, we found this, and can you tell me what it is? And I'll say, okay, well, can you give me some background on it? And it will be, you know, a part off an airplane that was somewhere flying, or a missile. And then it just hits me like how important it is, the things that we're doing here on base, how it affects everyone all over the whole country. And I feel a lot of satisfaction in my job here. So anyway, that's my story.
Thank you. Well, I think we have a few minutes for some questions and answers. If anybody has any questions, we may be able to get some answers. Anybody at all?
What year did Lois first come here?
1990, January 22nd, 1990. So I've been here 16 and a half years. Right, for my age group, yes, I'm a newcomer, and that puts me in 2 different camps. It's kind of fun. And I recently figured out that I've actually lived here longer than I've lived anywhere else, and I've worked here longer than I've worked anywhere else. Yep. So maybe I learned finally.
Kennedy, in back.
Yeah, I know it's hard to recruit women here. I've heard that it is hard to recruit women engineers here at China Lake. Do you think it's because the town is kind of conservative? Is that maybe one reason why it's hard to recruit, or what have some of your experiences been, or what have you heard?
Betty, he's asking about recruiting women engineers at China Lake.
Well, I'm actually one of the recruiters here, so. And I don't think it's so much that it's hard to recruit, it's just that the majors that we recruit in, you don't have a lot of females that are graduating in those fields, so it's very competitive with industry and other agencies, so that plays a part in trying to recruit females. So, I mean, I've interviewed, I've been to Georgia Tech probably 5 times, and in those 5 times, 2 different occasions, I've actually managed to recruit a female for China Lake. It's just that it's limited, and it is a very competitive field out there.
It's not because it's so conservative here and they prefer some other.
No, that usually does not play a part in it when it comes down to that. It's just that I usually have a very limited number to recruit and to interview.
I'd like to put a slightly different point of view on that. In the time period when I was coming here, of course, there weren't so many people here, men or women or anything, and they felt that this was a hardship area. So they let us have privileges on the base, like the 10-cent movies and the commissary privileges. And they didn't realize that some of these scientists from back east were coming here because of the mountains to climb and the ski areas and the boondocking in the desert in the wintertime and all those fringe benefits. So the hardship was actually a land of opportunity for many people.
Any other questions?
I think that you just answered my question, because my question was, when you first came here, you were startled at the isolation and the heat and this and that, and I was wondering if any of you had any input after being here for as long as you have, what you really like about this area now, and what besides the work has kept you here.
I can leave on Flex Fridays. I've gotten better. Because when I first moved out here, I mean, I prayed for Flex Fridays. I'm telling you, I got off work on Thursday evening, and everybody knew probably 6 o'clock Friday morning, Betty's little car was heading down the interstate. I learned how to catalog shop real well when I moved here, something I hadn't done before. And I've gotten better. Over the years, you know, as you develop friendships, you become involved in the community, you find things to do. See, I'm not an outdoors person, so telling me to go ski, telling me to go rock climb, telling me to ride the bike, never gonna cut it. Hiking, So it meant I had to find something else that would interest me in the community that would make me want to stay, and that was been part of it.
From my take, you know, I was a young mother of 2 small children, and I couldn't think of a better community to raise my children in. I was not afraid to let my kids go out and ride their bikes. They're 17 and 15 now, so now I'm a little nervous that they're driving around in the street. But that's pretty much what's kept me tied to this community, is the local youth sports, and it just provides a very nice foundation for a family unit.
Well, Samantha, you're so young coming here. Do you miss the social life, or is that okay?
Okay.
As a single person in town, it can be a little bit tough. Not to, you know, put down any of the single men that are in town, but the pickings are a little slim. It's okay though. I have a lot of friends, and and I do have fun, and I get out of town some. It can be a little bit tough sometimes.
So what types of things do you get to do? Do you go rock climbing or skiing? Or?
Well, I bought a house a few months ago.
Oh, did you?
So I've been spending an awful lot of time on renovations.
Good for you. Congratulations.
And I like to go hiking, and I go to the gym a lot. I used to practice Taekwondo. Haven't got around to doing that since I've lived here, but since I bought my house, I was able to put up a kicking bag so I can pick out my frustrations. And I don't just
Great.
whatever happens, whatever comes up that I feel like doing, I'm still free to go do it. So.
Great. Thank you.
The
Okay,
job
well-
is what keeps me here.
Your job?
The job, yeah. I mean, from day one, there's so much to do, so many things that can be done, and like was pointed out earlier, so much opportunity. And then I was lucky enough, fortunate enough to be awarded a fellowship and went away to school for 2 years. And that, of course, entailed a time commitment, which didn't bother me at all because I've just enjoyed working here so much and feel like I'm contributing to a mission. A real important mission that I can't imagine working somewhere else.
Well, I've heard that you seem to have more variety here than in industry. You don't seem to get quite so pigeonholed in industry, more so in industry than you do here. Is that you?
Well, some of the interviews that I had before I came here actually gave me that impression. And you have to realize that coming from the background that I did, this was all new to me. I had no clue. This was a whole different world to me, and it's taken me this long really to try to figure it out. But some of the interviews that I had, I left them with the impression that 5 years from now, I'm going to be sitting at that desk with that bookshelf doing that task, doing it better, but doing that task. And so, like I said, I couldn't have ended up at a better place. And I actually had calls from a couple of people that I interviewed with, and when they found out where I was, and they said the same thing. They said, with your personality, that's probably the best place for you to be.
All right, well, thank you very much. I want to remind you in the audience that we do have evaluation forms. We'd love to have you fill out for us. You can either leave them at the desk before you go, or you can put them in the guard mail. And I do have certificates of appreciation for each of our panelists today. So Jean.
Thank you.
Make sure you get the right ones. And Lois.
Thank you.
And Betty. And Kim.
Thank you.
And Samantha.
Thank you.
Mary, can I say one final comment?
Yes, absolutely. We have one final comment.
When I first came here, people were more than willing to try to say, give me the names of people that were heroes and heroines to try to show me that there was plenty of opportunity for me. And I have to say that it's a real honor to be on the panel with Jean Bennett because her name was one of the ones that came up routinely as a China Lake heroine. So
somebody has to be first. So I'm the guinea pig. But I've had a lot of fun here, and I didn't answer why you're here, but I like the wide open spaces, and with the exception of the last week, the climate, even in the summer, is a lot nicer here than where I grew up in D.C. before the days of air conditioning. Think about that. And I just like the wide open spaces. I take my dogs out and run them on Bee Mountain and turn them loose, and they have fun chasing all sorts of things. And I enjoy it, and I just enjoy being here. I'm connected with various groups right now at the Matarango Museum, and I'm having fun doing things with them and other groups around I've played with, and had a friend that is in a ghost town up in Cerro Gordo, and I've been up there, and just lots of opportunities here.
Thank you.